30 years passed since January 20 tragedies. President Ilham Aliyev, First Lady Mehriban Aliyeva, state and government officials visited the Alley of Martyrs to commemorate the memory of our heroic sons and daughters who have fallen for the independence of our state. On January 20, 1990, leading of battle divisions of the Soviet Army aimed against white mass figured out on the streets and squares of Baku to protest against aggressive actions of Armenia, which was raising territorial claims to our country against protection rendered to this country by the government of the former USSR, had brought to the unprecedented tragedy in Azerbaijan. The shooting of civilians who rose to fight for national freedom, the territorial integrity of the country, hundreds of innocent dead and wounded as a result of large-scale terror once again demonstrated to the whole world the criminal essence of the totalitarian Soviet regime in anticipation of its collapse. The atrocious acts of terrorism committed in that day by military machine of the former Soviet state against the people of Azerbaijan will always remain as one of the worst crimes against humanity. The tragedy of January 20th, which caused great human losses, the killing of innocent people, clearly demonstrated the steadfastness and courage of our people, their desire to fight for freedom and independence, their reluctance to continue and tolerate the betrayal policy of the criminal imperial leadership led by the central government. January 20 is immortalized in the memory of Azerbaijani nation not only as a day of the nationwide sorrow. January 20 is a day of courage and heroism. This day demonstrated the greatness of our people who managed to courageously resist the power of the empire, to stand up against its punitive machine with their breasts, not being afraid to declare the right to independence and freedom. It was these events that clearly demonstrated that the Azerbaijani people are determined to fight for the restoration of violated rights and sovereignty. But the Soviet leadership committed a terrible crime against the Azerbaijani people instead of preventing these growing tensions. Unfortunately, the leadership of both the USSR and Azerbaijan, being the direct organizers and executors of this bloody crime, naturally did not take any measures to solve it and bring the criminals to justice, but on the contrary did everything possible to hide it. Immediately after the tragedy on January 21, 1990, national leader Mehriban Aliyev visited the office of Azerbaijan's permanent representation in Moscow. He expressed solidarity with his people, sharply condemned the Soviet leadership for committing the bloody tragedy and exposed those who led the operation. In those difficult days, the people felt that they were not alone in their grief. Having worked for many years as the first secretary of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of Azerbaijan, first deputy chairman of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, was a member of the Politburo of the Central Committee of the CPCU, Mehriban Aliyev fell into disfavor of the leadership of the Soviet Union and retired. In those terrible and bitter days, despite all the deprivation, he accompanied the nation and stand in solidarity with them. With his statement, Mehriban Aliyev in fact assessed the processes taking place in Azerbaijan at that time, together with drawing attention to the unequivocally unfair attitude of the USSR leadership towards Azerbaijan. The great leader sharply condemned the Soviet government, who appointed a politically illiterate person with slavish thinking to the post of the head of the republic, which caused a deep gulf between the people and the authorities. This abyss served primarily the interests of the center and thereby caused first problems and more specifically the tragedy of January 20th. Sometime later, November 21, 1990, under the leadership of the initiative of the national leader Mehriban Aliyev, the Supreme Majlis of the Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic gave a political and legal assessment of this tragedy. This historical document identified the perpetrators and those responsible for committing political and military aggression against the Azerbaijani people. After the fall of the Soviet regime and the restoration of the state independence of Azerbaijan, the then leaders of the republic engaged in a struggle for power, did not take any targeted steps to investigate the causes of the serious crime and give it a political and legal assessment to identify the culprits of the tragedy. Only after the return of the great leader Mehriban Aliyev to the leadership of the country, the events of January 20th received in 1994 a political and legal assessment, and the names of the criminals were given to the public. The martyrs who fought for the freedom of Azerbaijan will forever remain in the national memory, and their family members, relatives and friends are surrounded by state care. Issues of social protection, pensions for people who became disabled during the January events are always in the focus of attention of the head of state. The events of January 20 entered our history memory not only as a tragedy but as a day of sorrow. The place of this black date in the fate and history of our people is even more significant in terms of meaning and content. January 20 went down in the history of the Azerbaijani people and as the peak of the selflessness and heroism. At the end of the 20th century, our people suffered invaluable losses, but demonstrating exceptional will and courage and unshakable national spirit, wrote a story that will be proud of centuries. He proved to the world that we as a nation are able to establish justice and protect our dignity. Therefore, Bloody January, being a tragedy for the Azerbaijani people, is the highest peak in terms of protecting dignity in the history of people who are ready to sacrifice their lives on this path. This page of our history, although it opened under the whistle of imperial bullets, is written in the blood of our martyrs and written for forever.